I was drinking my morning coffee when I saw it. Right there on page 12 of Manhattan Weddings magazine, my daughter Annie's smiling face in a white designer gown. My hands started shaking as I read the caption. Elite attorney Annie Harper Rosenthal celebrates her union with investment banker Jeremy Rosenthal at the Plaza Hotel. The magazine had been left on my kitchen table by my neighbor's daughter. She probably thought I'd enjoy seeing a local girl make it big. But as I stared at the glossy photo, one thing hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't in any of the pictures, not one. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Annie's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice already sounding annoyed. "Annie, honey, I just saw your wedding photos in the magazine. They're beautiful, but I'm confused. When is the ceremony? Did my invitation get lost in the mail?" There was a long pause. Too long. "Mom?" she said finally, her voice turning cold. "You weren't invited. You don't fit the image we're going for. It would be uncomfortable." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen table. I found out later what really happened. Annie had been sitting in Jeremy's penthouse apartment, flipping through wedding magazines with him. They were discussing the guest list when Jeremy brought up his concerns. "Annie, darling," he'd said, not looking up from his laptop. "Your mother, she's lovely, I'm sure, but my family will be there. The Steinbergs, the Goldmans, these are people who matter in our circles." Annie had nodded, already seeing where this was going. "She drives that old Honda, Jeremy. She lives in that tiny house in Pennsylvania. She shops at Walmart, for God's sake. Can you imagine her sitting next to your mother?" Jeremy had laughed, the kind of laugh that cuts right through you. "I can picture it now. Your mother asking the waiter if they have any chicken fingers on the menu." They both laughed then, my own daughter laughing at the idea of me being there on her special day. "You're right," Annie had said, picking up her gold pen. "I'll handle it." She drew a line through my name on the guest list. Just like that. 34 years of being her mother, erased with one stroke. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The coffee grew cold in my cup. The morning sun moved across the table, but I didn't move with it. Finally, I walked to my bedroom and opened my closet. In the back, behind my winter coats, was a fireproof safe. I turned the combination, Colin's birthday, and opened it. Inside was everything I'd prepared for Annie's wedding. A hand-sewn quilt that had taken me 6 months to finish. The pattern was called Double Wedding Ring, and I'd stitched it with love in every thread. There was a card I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to find the perfect words. And underneath it all, wrapped in tissue paper, were the bearer bonds. $1.5 million. The money Colin and I had saved and invested for decades. Money we'd planned to give Annie as a wedding gift, to set up her future. I touched the bonds gently, remembering how excited Colin had been when we'd decided on this gift. "She'll never have to worry," he'd said. "She'll be set for life." I closed the safe and turned the lock. "Well," I whispered to the empty room. "Not anymore." The wedding was featured on the local news 2 weeks later. I sat in my living room, watching my daughter's fairy tale moment unfold on my small television. The reporter gushed about the elegant affair and the who's who of Manhattan society in attendance. Annie looked beautiful. Her dress probably cost more than I spent in a year, but she looked radiant. Jeremy stood beside her in his tuxedo, looking like he belonged in a magazine himself. The camera panned across the reception hall. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a string quartet. Everything was perfect and cold and expensive. "The couple met at Harvard Law," the reporter said. "Both come from distinguished families with deep roots in New York's social scene." No mention of Annie's mother. No mention of the woman who had raised her, fed her, bandaged her scraped knees, and helped her with homework for 18 years. I was invisible, just like she wanted. I reached for the remote and turned off the television. Then I walked to my desk and pulled out a stack of papers I'd been avoiding. Donation forms for the Riverside Youth Literacy Program. It was time to put that money to better use. My lawyer, George Patterson, had known my family for 20 years. When I called him about making a large donation, he didn't ask too many questions. He just scheduled an appointment. $1.5 million, I said, sitting across from his desk. I want it to go to the Riverside Youth Literacy Program. but I want to remain anonymous." George raised his eyebrows. He knew Annie worked in corporate law, making good money, but he'd never suspected how much Colin and I had accumulated over the years. "Are you sure about this, Elsie? That's a significant amount." I thought about Annie's laugh when Jeremy made his joke about chicken fingers. I thought about being erased from her guest list like I never mattered. "I'm sure. The program helps kids from low-income families learn to read. Kids who might not have anyone else believing in them." George nodded and started preparing the paperwork. "I'll process this within the week. The program director will be thrilled." As I signed the donation forms, I remembered something Annie had said last Christmas. She'd scoffed at a news story about literacy programs. "Why throw money at people who won't help themselves?" she'd said. Well, now she'd find out exactly how much money could be thrown. The news broke 3 days later. I was pulling weeds in my garden when my neighbor Louis rushed over, waving his phone. "Elsie, did you see this? Someone donated $1.5 million to that reading program downtown. Can you believe it? Some anonymous local donor." I kept pulling weeds, trying to look surprised. "That's wonderful, Louis. Those kids need all the help they can get." The story spread quickly through our small town. By evening, it was trending on social media. "Mystery millionaire helps local kids" was the headline that kept popping up. But news travels fast in the digital age. Someone at the donation center had leaked my name to a blogger, despite the supposed anonymity. By midnight, my phone was buzzing with messages. Meanwhile, in her luxury honeymoon suite in Bali, Annie was scrolling through her morning newsfeed. She was sipping coffee from a crystal cup when she saw the headline, "Local mother gives $1.5 million to charity after being snubbed by daughter's wedding." The article included a photo of me from my real estate days, along with details about the donation and Annie's wedding snub. Annie's coffee cup shattered on the marble floor. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, loud enough to wake Jeremy in the next room. My phone rang at 6 in the morning. I'd been expecting it. "Where did you get that kind of money?" Annie's voice came through the speaker like a slap. I was sitting in my kitchen, making oatmeal, the same kitchen where I'd learned I wasn't invited to her wedding. "Good morning, Annie. How's the honeymoon? Don't you dare act casual with me. The whole internet is talking about this. My colleagues are texting me. You made me look like a monster." I stirred my oatmeal slowly. "I didn't make you look like anything, honey. I just made a donation to help children learn to read." "But where did that money come from? You live in a tiny house. You drive a 15-year-old car. Not everything you see is all there is, Annie." There was silence on the other end. I could hear Jeremy's voice in the background, asking what was wrong. "You don't understand," Annie said, her voice getting higher. "This makes me look terrible, like I abandoned my poor mother for money." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "That's not the point. You betrayed me. You should have told me about this money." I hung up the phone and went back to my oatmeal. It was getting cold, but it still tasted just fine. Jeremy was pacing around their hotel room like a caged animal. His face was red, and he kept running his hands through his hair. "You told me your mother was some small-town nobody," he shouted. "You said she had nothing. My parents are calling me, asking why my wife hid her family's wealth." Annie sat on the bed, still in her silk pajamas, staring at her phone. The story had been picked up by major news outlets now. "Secret millionaire mom snubbed by elite daughter" was trending nationwide. "I didn't know," Annie said weakly. "I swear, Jeremy, I had no idea she had that kind of money." "Well, your ignorance just cost us everything." Jeremy threw his phone onto the bed. "Do you know how much debt we're in? I borrowed against my trust fund for this wedding. I was counting on gift money to pay it back." Annie's face went pale. "What do you mean, borrowed?" "The wedding cost $400,000, Annie. The venue, the flowers, your dress, the honeymoon. I thought we'd get enough cash gifts to cover it. Rich people give generous wedding gifts. How much did we actually receive?" Jeremy's laugh was bitter. $60,000. Apparently your elite friends prefer crystal vases and silver picture frames." They stared at each other in the silence of their expensive hotel room, finally understanding what they'd lost. "Call your mother," Jeremy said. "Fix this. If she really has money, we need her help." Back home, I was tending to my small vegetable garden when Louis came over again. He looked worried. Elsie, I've been thinking about this news story. Are you okay? I mean, with Annie and everything? Louis had been my neighbor for 15 years. He'd helped me fix my roof after Colin died, and I'd made him casseroles when his wife was sick. He was the closest thing to family I had left. I'm fine, Louis. Really? It's just... Annie's gonna come around now, isn't she? Now that she knows about the money? I smiled sadly. Louis had always been perceptive. I expect she will. And what will you do when she does? I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees. I guess I'll find out what she's really made of. 3 days later, Annie called again. This time her voice was different, softer, more careful. Mom, I was thinking maybe Jeremy and I could come visit you next week. I feel terrible about how things went with the wedding. I want to make it right. Of course, honey, I said. I'd love to see you. But as I hung up the phone, I was already planning my next move. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out my address book. It was time to call George Patterson again. Annie arrived on a Tuesday morning, carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers and wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than my car payment. She hugged me at the door, the first time she'd hugged me in years. Mom, I'm so sorry about everything, she said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. I was wrong. So wrong. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd watched her wedding on television. Annie looked around with new eyes, probably calculating what everything was worth. This is such a cozy house, she said. I forgot how peaceful it is here. She was trying hard, I had to give her credit. She asked about my garden, complimented my cooking, and even offered to help with dishes. It would have been touching if I didn't know what was really motivating her visit. Mom, she said as we sat drinking tea from my everyday cups, I've been thinking about Dad's old real estate business. Do you still have any of his investments? There it was, the real reason for her visit. Oh, this and that, I said vaguely. Your father was always good with money. Annie leaned forward eagerly. Maybe I could help you manage things? I understand finances, and you shouldn't have to worry about all those details. I smiled and poured more tea. That's sweet, honey, but I manage just fine. Louis stopped by that afternoon and saw Annie's rental car in my driveway. When Annie left to get groceries, he knocked on my door. She's here for the money, isn't she? He said without preamble. I invited him in for coffee. Louis had watched Annie grow up, had seen how she'd changed over the years. Be careful, Elsie. I've seen this before with my own kids. When money's involved, people show their true colors. That evening, after Annie went to bed in my spare room, I quietly retrieved a lockbox from my closet. Inside were all my legal documents. My will, my trust papers, everything Colin and I had built together. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I called George Patterson. I need to make some changes to my estate planning, I told him. Can you come by the house this afternoon? Of course, Elsie. What kind of changes? I looked toward the spare room where Annie was still sleeping. I want to remove Annie as my beneficiary. I want to create a trust for her future children instead, with Louis as the trustee. George was quiet for a moment. That's a significant change, Elsie. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. George arrived that afternoon while Annie was out shopping. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd learned about her wedding from a magazine. I want to be very clear about this, George said as he prepared the new documents. Once you sign these papers, Annie will have no claim to your estate. Everything will go into trust for her children. If she has any, she won't be able to touch the principal. Good, I said firmly. And Louis will oversee everything? Yes, Louis will be the trustee. He'll make sure any children are provided for, education, health care, basic needs, but Annie herself gets nothing. As I signed my name to the documents, I thought about the quilt still sitting in my safe, the wedding gift that would never be given, the love that had been rejected. George frowned as he witnessed my signature. You know she might retaliate when she finds out, right? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I'm counting on it. When Annie returned with shopping bags full of groceries, all expensive brands I noticed, she was in an excellent mood. I thought we could cook dinner together tonight, Mom. Like old times. If she only knew that old times had just officially ended. For the next few days, Annie played the role of devoted daughter perfectly. She cooked elaborate meals, helped with household chores, and listened to my stories about her father with apparent interest. But I could see her growing impatience. She kept steering conversations toward money, asking about bank accounts and investment portfolios. "You know, Mom, this house could be worth a lot more if we updated the kitchen," she said one morning. "And that cottage Dad left you by the lake. The real estate market is hot right now. Maybe it's time to sell?" "I'm not planning on going anywhere, dear," I said, buttering my toast. "But you could use the money, live more comfortably, maybe move somewhere with better healthcare facilities." I looked at my daughter across the breakfast table. She was still beautiful, still polished, but there was something desperate in her eyes now. "Annie, I'm 72 years old. I've lived in this house for 40 years. I buried your father from this house. Why would I leave now?" "I just want what's best for you," she said, but her voice cracked slightly. That afternoon, I caught her in my bedroom, looking through my desk drawers. When she saw me, she jumped. "Sorry, Mom. I was looking for a pen." The pen holder on my desk was full of pens. A week into Annie's visit, I had a loud phone conversation with George Patterson, loud enough for Annie to overhear from the next room. "Yes, George, I understand the trust is irrevocable now," I said into the phone. "No, I don't want to make any more changes. The beneficiaries are set." I heard Annie's footsteps in the hallway, moving closer to my door. "And you're sure Annie can't contest it?" "Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear." When I hung up, Annie was standing in my doorway, her face pale. "Mom, what was that about? What trust?" I turned to face her, no longer pretending. "That was about my estate planning, Annie. Something I should have done years ago." "What do you mean? What beneficiaries?" I walked past her to the kitchen and she followed like a lost puppy. "I mean that I've made some decisions about my money. Decisions that reflect my values." Annie grabbed my arm. "What does that mean for me?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. The mask was completely gone now. No more pretense of loving daughter, just desperate greed. "That's no longer your concern, Annie." Annie left the next morning without saying goodbye. I found her note on the kitchen counter. "Had to get back to New York for work. Thanks for everything. Love, Annie." She was gone by the time I woke up. A week later, I received a thick envelope from a Manhattan law firm. Inside was a formal letter challenging the legality of my trust, claiming that I had been manipulated into changing my will due to emotional distress and possible mental incapacity. The letter accused me of suffering from age-related cognitive decline and suggested that my decision to disinherit Annie was evidence of diminished capacity. It was signed by Annie Harper Rosenthal, attorney at law. I read the letter twice, then smiled. I walked to my phone and called George Patterson. "George, I just received a very interesting letter from my daughter. I think it's time for phase 2 of our plan." "What do you want me to do, Elsie?" "I want you to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist. I want medical proof that I'm of sound mind. And then I want you to send that evaluation to Annie's law firm, along with a very clear message." I paused, thinking about the little girl who used to braid my hair and tell me she loved me. "Tell them that if they continue this frivolous lawsuit, I'll donate every remaining penny to charity. Every single penny." That night, I sat in Colin's old chair and opened the shoebox where I kept his letters. There was one he'd written to me just before he died, when he knew the cancer was winning. "My dearest Elsie," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing the world without me. I hope you remember what we always said about money. It reveals character. It doesn't create it." I traced his handwriting with my finger, remembering how we'd talked about Annie's future. "We worked hard to build something for our family," the letter continued. "But if Annie ever becomes someone who values money more than love, don't let our sacrifice enable her selfishness. Let her earn respect the way we did, through kindness, hard work, and treating others with dignity." The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. "Don't let anyone, even our own daughter, steal your peace. You deserve better." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Colin had been right about so many things. He'd been right about this too. In the morning, I would call the youth literacy program and schedule a visit. I wanted to see where my money was going. I wanted to see the faces of children who knew that someone, somewhere, believed in them. Unlike my own daughter, who had never learned that lesson. George called me the next week with good news. I've reviewed Annie's legal challenge with 3 other attorneys, he said. There's no case here, Elsie. You were evaluated by Dr. Morrison and found to be completely competent. Your financial records show a long history of sound decision-making. The trust was created properly and witnessed correctly. What did you tell her lawyer? I told them exactly what you asked me to say. Any further legal action will result in you donating your entire remaining estate to charity. They have 5 days to withdraw their challenge. 3 days later, Annie called me directly. Mom, please. I'm sorry about the lawsuit. I was just scared. Jeremy and I are in real financial trouble. Her voice was smaller now, less confident. The legal challenge had failed, and she knew it. I thought we could work something out, she continued. Maybe a loan? Just until we get back on our feet? Annie, I said gently, I forgave you a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to fund your lifestyle. But I'm your only child. Who else will you leave everything to? Children who need help learning to read. Families who can't afford healthcare. People who understand that money is a tool for helping others, not just themselves. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. I love you, Annie. I always will. But I won't enable you anymore. While Annie was dealing with her legal troubles, the internet had moved on to the next big story. But in legal circles, her reputation was quietly crumbling. A blogger had picked up the story of the lawsuit and posted it online. Elite lawyer tries to sue her own mother for disinheriting her after snubbing mom at wedding. The post went viral in the legal community. Comments poured in from lawyers, judges, and law students, all expressing disgust at Annie's behavior. How can you trust a lawyer who sues her own mother? One comment read, "If she'll betray family for money, what will she do to clients?" read another. Within a week, Annie's firm quietly removed her from their highest-profile cases. They didn't fire her, that would have created more drama, but they made it clear that her career advancement was over. Jeremy's family also distanced themselves. His mother stopped taking Annie's calls. His father removed Jeremy from consideration for a partnership in his investment firm. A colleague at Annie's firm summed it up perfectly in a whispered conversation by the coffee machine. You can recover from a lot of things in this business, but when you burn the bridge to your own family for money, that's a character flaw that doesn't heal. Annie had wanted to protect her elite image. Instead, she destroyed it completely. 2 months after the lawsuit was dropped, Louis stopped by with more news. I saw Jeremy at the grocery store yesterday, he said, settling into Colin's old chair. He looked terrible. Rumor is they're getting divorced. I wasn't surprised. Jeremy had married Annie for her connections and her image. When both of those crumbled, there wasn't much left to hold them together. She's moved back to that apartment she had before the wedding, Louis continued. The small one. Guess they lost the penthouse. I felt a pang of sadness for Annie, despite everything. She'd traded her family for a fantasy, and the fantasy had dissolved. Has she tried to contact you? Louis asked. No. I think she finally understands that I meant what I said. That afternoon, I drove to the Riverside Youth Literacy Program to see how my donation was being used. The director, Maria Santos, gave me a tour of the renovated building. Because of your gift, we've been able to hire 6 new teachers and expand our after-school program, she said proudly. We're helping 300 children now, compared to 50 before your donation. In one classroom, I watched a 7-year-old boy sound out words in his first chapter book. His face lit up when he successfully read a whole sentence by himself. That's exactly why I wanted to help, I told Maria. On my way home, I stopped at Louis's house to give him the official trustee documents. You're sure about this? He asked. Managing Annie's children's trust fund? I'm sure. You're the most honest person I know. If Annie ever has children, they'll be lucky to have you looking out for them. A week later, Louis called me with an urgent tone. Elsie, Annie just showed up at my house. She's asking me to lend her money from the trust. I wasn't surprised. Desperate people do desperate things. What did she say? She tried to guilt trip me. said you were being cruel and unreasonable, said I should help her just until she gets back on her feet. I could picture Annie on Louis's doorstep, probably crying, probably wearing her most humble outfit. She said the money was supposed to be for her anyway, and that you're just being vindictive. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that the trust is for her children only, if she ever has any, that you gave her every chance to show she cared about something other than money, and she failed every test. Louis paused. I also told her something else. What? I told her that you're the strongest, most generous woman I've ever known, and that she threw away the most valuable thing she ever had, your respect. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. The same kitchen where this whole story had started, with a wedding magazine and a phone call that broke my heart. But my heart wasn't broken anymore. It was peaceful. That evening, I opened my safe one more time. I pulled out the fireproof box that contained Annie's wedding gifts, the quilt, the card, and the bearer bonds. I spread the quilt across my bed, admiring the intricate stitching, all those hours of work, all that love woven into every thread, the double wedding ring pattern that symbolized eternal love and commitment. The card was still sealed in its envelope. I'd never opened it to reread what I'd written, but I remembered every word. I'd told Annie how proud I was of her, how much I loved her, how excited I was to see her start her new life. And the bonds. $1.5 million. Colin and I had saved for 30 years to give Annie this gift. We'd wanted her to be secure, to never worry about money the way we had when we were young. Instead of giving these gifts to someone who would have thrown them away on designer clothes and expensive vacations, I'd given that money to children who would use it to build better lives. I carefully folded the quilt and put everything back in the box. But instead of returning it to the safe, I walked to the kitchen and picked up my phone. "Louis," I said when he answered, "I have something I want to show you." The next morning, Annie appeared at my door. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup was smeared from crying. "Mom," she sobbed, falling into my arms. "I've lost everything. Jeremy left me. The law firm demoted me. I can't pay my rent." For a moment I felt like I was holding my little girl again, the child who used to run to me when she scraped her knee or had a bad dream. "I was wrong," she continued, her voice breaking. "I was so wrong about everything. I thought I knew what mattered, but I destroyed the most important thing I had." I led her to the couch and held her while she cried. Real tears this time, not the calculated performance from her previous visits. "I don't even care about the money anymore," she whispered. "I just want my mom back." I stroked her hair the way I used to when she was small. "Annie, I never stopped being your mom. You stopped being my daughter when you decided I wasn't good enough for your new life." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" I smiled sadly and wiped her tears. "I forgave you months ago, sweetheart. Love means I'll always forgive you." Then I took her hands in mine. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll reward bad behavior. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." 2 weeks later, George Patterson called me to his office for the final reading of my updated estate plans. Annie was there, sitting quietly in a chair by the window. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "As you know," George began, "Mrs. Harper has made significant changes to her will and trust arrangements." He read through the legal language, but the important parts were simple. Annie would inherit nothing. The house, the cottage, the investments, everything would go into trust for Annie's future children, with Louis as the trustee. "If you have children, Annie, they will be well provided for," George explained. "Education, healthcare, basic living expenses, all covered, but you personally will not have access to the principal." Annie nodded without speaking. She'd known this was coming. "There is one exception," George continued. "Your mother has set aside $50,000 for you. It's enough to get you back on your feet, find a new apartment, maybe start over somewhere else. But that's all." Annie looked at me with surprise. "Mom, you don't have to." "It's not a gift," I said firmly. "It's a loan. If you ever want a relationship with me again, you'll pay it back, every penny." Louis stood up from his chair. "This is what real legacy looks like, taking care of the next generation without enabling selfishness." We all sat in silence for a moment, understanding that this was the end of one story and the beginning of another. "Annie," I said softly, "you can still choose who you want to be. It's not too late to become someone I can be proud of again." This past Thanksgiving, I cooked dinner for Louis and his family. We gathered around my small dining table. Louis carved the turkey while his grandchildren argued about who got the drumsticks. The house was full of laughter and warmth, the way holidays should be. After dinner, Louis helped me clear the dishes. "Any word from Annie?" he asked quietly. "She called yesterday," I said. "She's working on Thanksgiving at the legal clinic." "That's good," he said. "That's the Annie I remember from when she was little." I looked around my small, simple house. The same house Annie had been embarrassed by, the same life she'd found inadequate for her image. But tonight, it was full of people who loved me for who I was, not what I had.